He has the authority to kill them. That's the White House press secretary on President Trump's new assertion of power to kill suspected drug runners, even if they survive a first strike. Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz on Venezuela and Trump's planned pardon of the former president of Honduras convicted of drug trafficking. The Afghan gunman who shot 2 National Guardsmen on patrol here in Washington in 2024, there were warning signs about his stability. So why was he granted asylum in 2025? Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Let me welcome you to the Takeout. These are confusing times in the Trump administration's 9/11-style drug war. This is a bit of a preamble. You know I love those. America has been fighting one kind of drug war or another for more than 5 decades. President Richard Nixon was the first to use that phrase, war on drugs, doing so in June 1971. And we as a nation have been at it in costly fits and starts ever since. But the Trump presidency has redefined that war on drugs. Previously, it was a law enforcement enterprise with assets like the Coast Guard, Border Patrol, DEA, interdicting drugs on land and on sea to assist federal or state prosecutions. Those days are over. Now it is a full-on war with an entire range of military engagement because the president has designated certain drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And in a post-9/11 world, that means militarily, operational limits are virtually non-existent, or one might say, subject to extremely wide presidential discretion. Last night, President Trump said he knew nothing about a Washington Post story that told of a 2-tiered strike September 2nd against a suspected drug boat, one wherein 2 survivors clung to the wreckage after the first strike. According to the Post's reporting, a second aerial bombardment was ordered by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. The survivors died.
I don't know that happened. And Pete said he did not want them. He didn't even know what people were talking about. So we'll look into it. But no, I wouldn't have wanted that, not a second strike.
The sequence, as reported by the Washington Post, has raised questions in Congress and among U.S. allies about the legality of killing those survivors. Investigations have now been launched in the House and Senate. The White House press secretary was questioned today by reporters, and she acknowledged that there was, in fact, a second strike, but denied Hegseth ordered it. She added, the president has the authority to kill any suspected drug trafficker, period.
To be clear, does the administration deny that second strike happened, or did it happen and the administration denies that Secretary Hegseth gave the order?
The latter is true, Abe, and I have a statement to read for you here. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war.
Related to what you just heard, the president also declared the skies above Venezuela, quote, closed in its entirety, which he does not have the legal authority to do, and which, if it happened to this country, we would consider it an act of war. Trump, however, said, read nothing into it. Confusing. Also confusing, Trump said this weekend he intends to pardon the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, whom a federal jury in New York convicted in 2024 of years of collaboration with drug cartels to see to it that upwards of 400 tons, yes, 400 tons of cocaine made it to the United States. Hernandez was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Evidence presented at trial showed Hernandez accepted drug bribes and overlooked cartel-ordered killings. Trump said Hernandez was, quote, set up, unquote, by the Biden administration. So to summarize, Trump can kill any suspected drug runner, declare the skies above Venezuela closed as part of his war on drugs, and can pardon a convicted drug trafficker as part of his war on, well, it can't be drugs, it must be Biden policies. We begin tonight with our Ed O'Keefe, who joins us from the White House. Ed, lots to uncoil and unwrap today. Please proceed.
Well, you've laid out there that the White House, after several days of debate here in Washington about the legality of those strikes, confirmed that there was a second strike on that alleged drug boat, but defended the actions of the defense secretary in the midst of that, suggesting that it was, in fact, a Navy admiral instead who carried out the attack and that led to the death of those two other sailors. And let's listen here for a moment to a little more of what she said in justifying those attacks.
With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated. And I would just add one more point to remind the American public why these lethal strikes are taking place.
Admiral Bradley is Admiral Frank Bradley, a U.S. Navy SEAL who currently is in charge of U.S. Special Operations Command. We've never really seen them call out a military officer quite like that directly before. We should point out she also said that in the view of the White House, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war, and that Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority of that law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated. So they're arguing he had the legal authority to do this because the president's classified these groups as terrorists, and in this case, more specifically, narco-terrorists. Look, this is a legal argument now, Major, that's going to, wrap up various elements of Washington, the White House, and Capitol Hill. With lawmakers returning tonight, let's see now in the next few hours, in the next day or so, if the Republican and Democratic heads of the Armed Services Committee still agree that this is something that needs to be looked into more thoroughly by those committees, whether they would hold hearings or investigations, and then ultimately how cooperative the Pentagon would be in sharing information. A lot of the frustration that lawmakers have right now with all of this is that information, in their view, has not been shared as clearly or as thoroughly as they would like. And there's been a belief that in some cases information has been withheld that lawmakers have sought. So this report came very quickly after bipartisan condemnation, notably from the Republican heads of those committees, which signals how much concern there is about this across Washington.
Starting us off tonight on the North Lawn of the White House, Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much, sir. Jamil Jaffer joins me now. He is the founder of the National Security Institute at George Mason University and, importantly for this conversation, served as associate counsel to President George W. Bush. It's great to have you here. Thanks so much. There is a conversation going on in some corridors of Washington that invoke the terminology war crimes. I want to play for you a soundbite from Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine on that very point. Let's please listen.
If that reporting is true, it's a clear violation of the DOD's own laws of war, as well as international laws about the way you treat people who are in that circumstance. And so this rises to the level of a war crime if it's true. And the questions that we've been asking for months are, give us the evidence that the folks on board were really narco traffickers.
Senator Kaine from Face the Nation, is he correct?
Well, look, this is a difficult question. Under the laws of war, we follow the Geneva Conventions, right? There's an additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions that deals with people who are sort of out of the fight, who are out of combat, or to combat. They've been injured, they're sick, they're wounded, they're shipwrecked, they're out of the fight. That says that you're not allowed to attack those people, additional protocol 1. We haven't ratified that. Now, a lot of people believe that parts of our additional protocol 1, including that particular article, represent a statement of the actual law of war as accepted by all nations. And in fact, the DoD law of war manual suggests that the or to combat definition of their additional protocol 1 applies to our soldiers as a general matter. So at least according to the DoD law of war manual, you can't go after somebody who's not in the fight. Now, these guys were hanging on to the boat. Were they in the fight? Were they not in the fight? That's a difficult question. Seems, though, under the circumstances, if we have the facts right, we really know what the facts are. If we have the facts right, probably not the right thing to do.
Jamil, I also said in my opening, this was a 9/11 style war on drugs, fundamentally different than previous administrations. You are very well versed in the authorization of military force that created a sort of umbrella designation that created a lot of legal authorities that many administrations used in that war on terror. There is no authorization for military force for this particular drug interdiction effort, is there?
That's right. There is no authorization.
That's an important fact, right?
No, that's exactly right. And even though the president has designated a variety of cartels, including Nicolas Maduro, terrorist groups, foreign terrorist organizations on one hand, and especially designated global terrorists on the other, that doesn't give him the authority under the AUMF, because that one was bounded by the people who were involved in, planned, or harbored the people involved with 9/11. Now, prior administrations have taken a broad view.
There are a lot of elasticity to that definition.
It doesn't go this far.
It doesn't go this far. And does that bring this to a level where it's very core legality? Not just this September 2nd, which was, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, the very first strike carried out, but all of these strikes, are they on somewhat tenuous legal ground?
Well, actually, I think the president has a pretty good argument here, right? I think he does. His argument is he's commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He has the executive power. He has some amount of authority to deal with immediate threats to the country. And he says, look, these drugs, fentanyl, other drugs, cocaine, have killed tens of thousands of Americans. They're dying in America today. We need to cut the drug trade off. I'm going to prosecute this not as a law enforcement matter, as we have for the better part of a few decades. I'm going to treat it like a national security matter. I'm going to use my commander-in-chief authority. Now, Congress could constrain him. They could say, "Look, you got the War Powers Resolution. We want to authorize it." Right? Congress isn't doing that. They're letting him go along with it. Now, would he be on stronger footing if he had a statute? Of course. Does he have some amount of authority? Sure. The question is, who's going to challenge him? Who's going to stop him?
And you know as well as I do, if he went to Congress and said, "I would like a designation for this war on terror," the politics would probably favor him.
It's hard to know.
In a drug context like this.
It's true. It's hard to know for sure, but there's no doubt he'd have a strong argument. And his point is, look, just go ahead and stop me. You don't want me to do it? You've got plenty of tools. You can cut off the funding, do what you want. You can stop me. They haven't done that.
Subject policy experts, always a pleasure to have you, Jamil Jaffer.
Thank you
very much.
Appreciate it.
Earlier, I discussed much of this with Florida Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She serves as the ranking member of the House Appropriations Subcommittee for Military Construction and Veterans Affairs. Please take a listen. Let me quote for you the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. He has the authority to kill them. That is what she said today in reference to any suspected drug boat occupant heading toward the United States. Your reaction?
Well, I don't think that Caroline Leavitt or this administration have any idea what they're talking about. My understanding of a double tap strike is that that is not only of questionable legality, depending on the circumstances, but that in a wartime situation, which they have referenced this as, they've labeled these boats as enemy combatants, then, I mean, a double tap situation is a potential war crime and could result in serious prosecution. Major, this administration's policy towards Venezuela is completely inside out. I'm happy to talk with you about the myriad of ways, but this is a really dangerous order that they carried out. Not only are they killing people indiscriminately, which is something that Maduro does, not the United States, but now they've essentially, it seems like, violated the international law and the rules of war.
So there are a couple of ways you as a legislator can get involved in this. The National Defense Authorization Act is pending. It's going to conference committee. There could be stipulations drafted in there. There's an appropriations bill for the military that could also have stipulations in there. Do you see that action coming in the next few days or weeks?
I think it's essential that we use those tools available to us, Major, because look at what's going on here. Trump's policy towards Venezuela is so inside out that he is both declaring Maduro a terrorist while sending, by revoking TPS, 400,000 Venezuelans here in the United States into the arms of someone he declares a terrorist. He is striking what he calls drug boats in both the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific, while also giving a pardon to a former president of Honduras who was convicted of drug running 400 tons of cocaine, which actually does come from Venezuela. I mean, the inconsistency and the danger that, by the way, he's also coordinating with Maduro on deportation flights while unilaterally declaring, which he can't do, the Venezuelan airspace closed. He doesn't know what he's doing. He is allowing the killing of people without due process. And what he's not doing is making sure that we can have a transition to democracy in Venezuela, which my constituents, I represent the largest percentage of Venezuelans of anyone in the country, they're desperate to have democracy restored. And the rightful president, Edmundo Gonzalez, should be serving as president.
In that regard, Congresswoman, how do your constituents put all this together, what you just described? Clearly, your constituents want regime change in Venezuela. They probably or may not want it done violently at the hands of the United States government. Are they ambivalent about what they see from the Trump administration or what?
Oh, no. I mean, they're not ambivalent. I mean, so many of them have families still in Venezuela. And what they universally want is the democracy that was beloved, and the prosperous nation that was Venezuela is restored. And there needs to be a decision made by this administration to engage the Latin American leadership across our region and use the sanctions that were previously applied, that Trump removed, reapply those sanctions and stop letting Maduro take bribes in exchange for the deportations, because what he's doing is Trump is funding Maduro with oil money that previously he wasn't able to get access to because Trump lifted the sanctions. This is what I mean by an inside-out policy.
As you well know, 6 Democrats recorded a video saying that members of the intelligence community and the military did not have to follow any illegal order. I'm sure you've had lots of conversations. Do you believe the genesis for that video is what happened on September 2nd with this, as you described, a double-tap attack, which is one and then another to make sure that no survivors actually survive?
Well, the administration has now admitted that they ordered that double tap. And look, Admiral Horley is leaving, from what I understand, in part because of his disagreement with the Secretary of Defense. Look, more than anyone, I want to make sure that Maduro leaves power. He's illegally holding on to power right now. That's what my constituents desperately want. But we need consistent leadership out of the administration, and we certainly don't need a president who is threatening to engage us in war, is engaged in committing war crimes himself, potentially, and deporting thousands and thousands of Venezuelans, coordinated with Maduro, he's deemed a terrorist, back to Venezuela. My constituents deserve better. Venezuelans deserve a democracy, and we need leadership that comes together through the executive and legislative branch to do that. And Republicans in Congress need to stop just rolling over and allowing Trump to get away with all of this.
Very quickly, Congresswoman, when the president declares the skies above Venezuela closed in their entirety, what does that even mean?
Who knows what that means? He doesn't have the authority to close Venezuelan airspace. And meanwhile, he is coordinating with Maduro to deport, on deportation flights back to Venezuela from the United States. I mean, he has an incoherent, inexplicable policy that makes no sense to anyone, that isn't consistent, and that isn't going to result in what we absolutely need to make sure happens, which is transition to democracy with Maduro's departure and Edmundo Gonzalez becoming the rightful president of the United States, president of Venezuela, like he should be.
Florida Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Major.
So the come right here on the Takeout as prosecutors look for a motive in the shooting of 2 U.S. National Guard members here in Washington, D.C. New emails reveal concerns over the suspected gunman's mental health. Plus, President Trump goes on a post-shooting social media tirade, the message that targeted Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and singled out that state's Somali community. And Tennessee's 7th Congressional District special election, well, that's tomorrow. President Trump won there by some 20 points. So why is that race causing concern for Republicans? We will answer that question. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back. We are learning about the mental health struggles of the alleged National Guard shooter after he came to the United States from Afghanistan. Emails from 2024 obtained by CBS News shows he spent weeks on end in isolation, and his caseworkers expressed concern over so-called manic episodes. Nicole Skanga joins me now. Nicole, will have more on that, but we have an update on the condition of the 2nd National Guardsman survivor, Andrew Wolf. What is it?
Yeah, that's right. A glimmer of hope for Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf. The West Virginia governor saying today during a press conference that when a nurse asked Wolf, who had emerged from surgery on Thursday and was formerly in an induced coma but has since waken up, when he was asked for a thumbs up, he did respond to that nurse's request and he was able to wiggle his toes. So sounds like we're not out of the woods just yet. His family is asking for everyone's prayers and also prayers for the family of Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, the 20-year-old who passed on Thanksgiving Day.
Very good. So Ramanola Lockenwall is the suspect. Granted asylum in the spring of 2025, but you have uncovered information about concerns expressed by those working alongside him in a caseworker capacity in 2024.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, these concerns sprung up in January of 2024, so more than a year prior to when asylum was granted, Major. And in fact, CBS News spoke with the caseworker that was tracking Rahmanullah Lockenwall's case, and she told us that by the beginning of 2024, when she wrote those emails, that his personality had evolved from a charismatic father to so depressed that he needed to be forced to go to some of his SIV interviews in 2024.
Special immigrant visa.
Special immigrant visa. A little more on that later, but I just want to read for you part of these emails that this caseworker sent. She writes, he spends most of his time for weeks on end in his darkened bedroom, not speaking to anyone, not even his wife and kids. I personally believe that Rahmanullah is suffering from both PTSD and his work with the U.S. military in Afghanistan, and that he is possibly manic depressive. And we have heard similar anecdotes of struggles with PTSD, both from U.S. officials, from folks who knew him here in the United States, and also from Afghan officials who formerly worked with him back when he was a commando.
Do we know if anyone who approved that asylum designation in 2025 had any awareness of these emails?
As of this point, that caseworker does not believe that DHS or USCIS were aware of her concerns. She said no one from DHS or USCIS had reached out to her about them. Major, it's not even clear, however, if someone having a mental health disorder or struggling with this sort of thing, if that would have, removed them from or disqualified them from the legal obligation that is asylum, right, which is this well-founded fear of persecution. Right. And of course, we know the suspect had this well-founded fear of persecution by the Taliban. I do want to note, though, that he was going through these special immigrant visa interviews at the same time as he was going through these asylum interviews. And one process is a little more intense than the other. When I spoke earlier today with Andrew Sullivan, he's a former Army commander who also runs No One Left Behind to help Afghan evacuees who helped us during the war resettle. He sort of noted this as a failing of the U.S. government, and not just the Biden administration, but previously the Trump administration, Trump 1.0, as well as the Obama administration, if our viewers would like to take a listen.
Go ahead, please.
A lot of this begins with the withdrawal. We had under-resourced the special immigrant visa program. We unfortunately had tens of thousands of deserving, patriotic, dutiful Afghans that would have been eligible for the SIV program that weren't processed in time. And so that is why we unfortunately had to have the evacuation that we did, bringing people in under humanitarian parole. And so really forward-facing and ensuring that that program continues to function, continues to support our most trusted and vetted allies is critical.
We failed to expedite the SIV process.
Correct.
And Major, another failing of the U.S. government, we never passed the Afghan Adjustment Act that would have given Afghan evacuees a path to permanent residency, as well as another round of vetting. It had bipartisan support, but it never got a hearing, a markup, or a floor vote. Now, top officials have pointed to what they say is domestic radicalization, but we should say so far, intelligence sources tell CBS News that there's no indication this suspect had any sort of foreign extremist ties.
Nicole Skanga, with everything we need to know on this story up to the moment. Thank you so much. Earlier, I spoke to Elliot Ackerman about this. He's an author and former intelligence officer who served in the same CIA-organized unit as the shooting suspect. He's written about the zero units, the vetting process, and Afghans who have come to the U.S. for the Free Press, which is owned by our parent company, Paramount Skydance. Please take a listen. What were the zero units, and if you were an Afghan, how did you become a member of one, Elliot?
Well, the zero units were a paramilitary force that worked with CIA during the entirety of the Afghan war, and their mission was largely to hunt down senior members of al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and also to secure parts of the border between Pakistan. And it depended on each unit how someone would come into one of these zero units, but they were largely recruited tribally. So members of certain tribes would enter a zero unit together. And I think an important distinction as well is the zero units didn't work for the Afghan government. They worked directly for the U.S. government.
We have heard a lot in the aftermath of the shooting of the two National Guardsmen here in Washington, D.C. about vetting. What would you say about vetting and zero unit participation?
Well, in order to come into the zero units, there was vetting. So anyone who was in one of these units had been vetted. Now, there can be a conversation about whether or not that vetting was sufficient over the long term to come and enter the United States. But these weren't people who had, just stormed onto the airfield at Kabul and hopped onto aircraft during that chaotic withdrawal. And I think in the case of the shooter, not only had there been whatever vetting he received in Afghanistan, there had also been a degree of vetting that occurred once he came into the United States. Obviously, that vetting wasn't sufficient to prevent this act, but the question becomes, what amount of vetting is, and is this ultimately a question of vetting?
And as you know, Elliot, the Trump administration has now paused all manner of reviews or re-reviewing everyone who came over from Afghanistan, stopped all special immigrant visa procedures. And you write in your piece in the Free Press, when a member of the veterans community in America, perhaps burdened to the point of collapse with the violence he has seen, acts out in inexcusable ways, do we paint the entirety of the veterans community in such broad and derogatory strokes? We know that's wrong. It's wrong here, too. What's your broader point?
What happened in Washington and the loss of life is a tragedy, and that is, of course, that's true. But it would only be a further tragedy if that is used to categorically demonize a group of people who fought alongside American service members for decades, and in this case, up against some of our greatest adversaries. I was on missions with zero units that went against top 10 al-Qaeda targets alongside members of SEAL Team 6, the U.S. Army Rangers. I think it's also important to note, too, that in the 20 years that zero units fought hand in hand with their American advisors, there was never a single green on blue attack, those type of attacks that plagued other types of American units. So what happened in Washington is absolute tragedy, but let's not make the mistake of categorically using it to demonize Afghans, and particularly to demonize this group of Afghans that fought so closely by our side for so long.
Quick reminder from our audience, Elliot, what's a green on blue?
Green on blue are these attacks where an Afghan soldier would shoot and sometimes kill an American soldier.
Right. And is it possible, and we don't know, Elliot, I'm not asking you to read anyone's mind, that life in America would be dislodging sufficiently so to bring back trauma from Afghanistan and create a mixture of emotions and rage that we haven't quite figured out?
I can't get into the mind of this shooter, and I don't, really want to. And I'm sure some of the motive will come out, in the days and the weeks ahead. But violence has a very long tail. Whether you're Afghan or whether you're American, I'm an American veteran. I can tell you, members of the veterans community have struggled to reintegrate into life at home. And when they act out, we don't demonize the entire veterans community, and we shouldn't make that mistake in the case of Afghans that are coming here to start their lives, some of whom are trying to get green cards, and some of whom, too, now, who I fought alongside, are now American citizens. So I think it would be a very big mistake for us to categorically demonize this group of people.
Elliot Ackerman, Free Press, I appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another back and forth between Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and President Trump, this time on the state's Somali community, a slur, and an ongoing fraud investigation and convictions there. More on all that next here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. President Trump recently used a long-discarded slur for people with intellectual disabilities to describe Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz. The governor responded during a recent interview with NBC.
He's normalized this type of hateful behavior and this type of language. And mainly, look, at first, I think it's just because he's not a good human being. But secondly, to distract from his incompetency. We know we just came through a Thanksgiving where prices are up. We know people are concerned about heating their homes as we're experiencing blizzards out here at the same time he's cutting those programs. So, look, we cannot allow this to be normalized.
CBS News Minnesota reporter and anchor Esme Murphy joins me now to discuss. Esme, it's great to have you with us. So, not to contextualize that slur, because there is no context for it, but the backdrop for this is a long-running investigation and set of prosecutions in Minnesota, some members of the Somali community defrauding the state during COVID and years after in various social services. That is sort of one part of this conversation. Take it from there.
Yes. Well, the Somali community has been the focus of these federal investigations into fraudulent applications for COVID aid and also post-COVID aid. The scope of this is enormous. We're talking about more than 70 people indicted. Well over 60 have pled guilty already. And this is just in the COVID scheme. The scheme itself was focused on food for children who were not going to school because of the pandemic and needed food and sustenance during the day. Since then, post-COVID, we've had the same type of allegations focused on autism programs and also housing programs. The scope alone of the Feeding Our Future COVID fraud is estimated at $240 million, and a lot of people say the real price is far north from there.
I want to read to you something that the president posted on his social media platform. Quote, Somalian gangs are roving the streets looking for prey as our wonderful people stay locked in their apartments and houses, hoping against hope they will be left alone. The seriously did governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, does nothing. Are gangs roving the streets looking for prey in Minnesota?
No, absolutely not. And I know you've been here, Major, that's just not the case. I do think, though, that this fraud is of the scope and scale that it is very significant. And a lot of people, candidates running against Governor Walz for governor in the 2026 election, are using it and focusing on it. It is a big deal. It's a lot of money, and there's no end in sight. That's one of the biggest problems. And it all has happened on Governor Tim Walz's watch. However, there are not gangs of Somalis roving the streets, and people are not behind locked doors scared to go out. That's just not the case.
And very quickly, Esme, in some of the reporting I have read, it was suggested that state officials were reluctant to more seriously investigate this earlier because they were afraid of being accused of having a racial bias or a hostility to the Somali immigrants.
I think that's absolutely true. In fact, when the state did try and stop this and filed a suit in 2022, the suit was actually dismissed and they were targeted for and accused of racism. So that is a fairly accurate statement. I think the people in charge of the state, including Governor Tim Walz, did not want to be portrayed that way. And when they finally did try and stop it with a lawsuit, the state was labeled a racist. So that's fair. Esme
Murphy, WCCO, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much. So there's a special election tomorrow in Tennessee's Trump country. Could there be a surprise? We're going to look and ask and then answer, if we can, that question. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Tennessee's 7th Congressional District is going to have a special election tomorrow. Political obsessives like me are very addicted to special elections. We watch them because we can't help ourselves. We watch them so closely. Now, there's no frontrunner in this race, which is why it's particularly interesting, because this is Trump country, 20-plus in 2024. The candidates, Republican Matt Van Epps, Democrat Afton Bain. This is razor thin in ways that we would not expect, even for the sort of peculiarities that often come with special elections. Hunter Woodall joins us now. Break down the peculiarities.
Major, this is a weird one. Now, what you think about this district is it's a sprawling district in Tennessee, reliably red, like you talked about, but it has a little bit of Nashville in there, and that's what makes the difference. You know, Nashville is, likely tending to vote more Democratic, and that has given Democrats a chance here. But also, special elections are just so unpredictable.
Low turnout, usually.
Low turnout. Obviously, it sounds like the weather's not too great down there for our friends who are covering that race.
Right after Thanksgiving, a particularly low turnout probability. And lots of money getting thrown in by both sides, not just Republicans, but Democrats.
That's exactly right. The Trump-affiliated MAGA Inc., they kicked in about $1.6 million, according to federal records I was just looking at. House Majority PAC, that's the Dems, around $1 million. So this is significant money that's going into this. And Republicans really normally shouldn't be worrying about this. But we have seen during the Trump era, these reliably red special elections can get weird, though they rarely do flip. Though, there's Democrats like Connor Lamb who've done it. But that was a more competitive, moderate seat. That's not really what we're seeing here.
And what are the range of expectations? I don't want to mislead our audience and think, well, Democrats are going to win in this place. They're probably not. I mean, the retiring Republican, Mark Green, won by 22 points, okay? The margins are staggering in favorability for Republicans. But the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, had a tele-rally today. President Trump called into that, which means there is some level of concern when Democrats talk about their expectations. What kind of numbers do they use?
Right. I mean, you're going to hear a lot about balance of power and all this. And really, it seems like Republicans are in a lose-lose here. They're supposed to win it in their eyes, but if they don't, perform well, Democrats are going to seize on it. You're already seeing that Democratic expectation setting. Single digits seems to be the talking point. If they can get this race within single digits, after Mark Green, the person that had held the seat last year, he won this by, like you said, more than 20 points. Democrats get those single digits, they're going to feel good. Doesn't seem like they think they're going to win, but obviously they're going to try and project confidence. But anything they do, they're going to try and use to build momentum going into the midterms.
And very quickly, Hunter, in a context like this, if you're a Republican on the fence about seeking re-election, meaning you might not, and you see a close outcome in this particular congressional district, that might push you over into the retirement category.
That's the thing. I mean, if you're seeing a lot of money, a lot of campaigning going into this, if you're a Republican who's been in a safe district, you're probably going to look at this and go, I don't know how much I want to do this again.
How much do I want to do this again? I asked that question myself more than once in any given week. Hunter Woodall, but I digress. Thank you so much. Another Trump ally is calling it quits in Congress. CM staying on theme. Texas Representative Troy Nehls stepping aside. And there's a person he has in mind, kind of familiar to him, who might get the seat next. I mean, like really familiar. Like you can't believe how familiar. More on that next. It is political reporter time here on The Takeout. Reese Gorman and Julia Manchester join me now. Reese covers politics and Congress for Notice. Remember, that's News of the U.S. That's what Notice stands for. Julia, White House reporter for The Hill. Julia, let's start with you. Yeah. Kind of a big day at the White House today. Trump on Air Force One last night. I don't know anything about this second strike. The White House today confirming it, just saying Hegseth didn't give the order. And then information about the MRI, where the president said, I can't remember what was MRI'd on my body. It turns out it was his heart and his belly. Kind of memorable, it seems to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, big news day when it comes to foreign policy. Just to start out with, obviously, the Venezuela strikes have really shaken Washington, particularly when it comes to who's to blame for this. And one thing that the White House has been having to deal with is some fallout from Republicans on Capitol Hill. And I think there has been some criticism, not a ton, but some from his, pro-MAGA base that this might be, stepping out of line from the America First principles that his party stands for. So I think there's certainly been back and forth on that, and that story's not going away. But the story about his health is also not going away as well. I mean, he's almost 80 years old, and we see this question repeatedly asked to him on Air Force One and briefings, and accumulated with him essentially the White House having to put out a memo from his doctor saying he was in, quote, excellent cardiovascular and overall health.
There you go. Reese, what is your take on the 7th Congressional District in Tennessee and the special election tomorrow? We were just talking to Hunter about it.
I see that it's kind of, this is just a sign that, a lot of these policies that have been put forth, there's a lot of things in administrations that is not very popular right now. And we see that a lot, especially when, even when Biden passed marquee legislation, the effects weren't felt. And so, there were some bad midterms. And this is kind of what's going on with Trump right now.
And the Republican concern there is not so much that there's going to be this massive Democratic turnout. It's just that the Republicans are not energized.
And all the Republican strategists I've talked to, even members, even Democrats I talked to, are like, we're not going to win this seat. The Democrats are like,
slow your roll on expectations.
Even if they were to win, they're going to lose it in next November when the real election comes about. But it's just a matter of Trump won the seat by over 20 points. And if he were to, Matt Van Epps was to win by 5, 6, anything less than 10 would be catastrophic just for, it'd be a win, but it would be the headlines and everything, the messaging around that would be very bad for Republicans.
And Julia, there's already been a lot of Republicans saying they're not going to seek re-election. Troy Nehls announced that over the weekend. Yeah. And guess who said, I'm going to run his exact twin brother. I don't know. The control room, I don't know if we have pictures or whatever. The exact...
Yeah,
they're identical
twins. Yeah.
Does that count as a replacement? I don't know. Is it same family? I don't know. How does that?
Reese would probably be better to answer that question than I am.
I think it would just be. I don't know if it's ever happened before in Congress. I think the funny part is say he's out one day, can Troy Nehls put his voting card in for him? Right. No one's going to be able to tell the difference. They look. It's not like it's.
When I said familiar, it's
they look exactly alike.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I couldn't tell the difference when they posted a selfie of who's who.
I do think, though, when it comes...
But he does have to go through the process of the primary and all that sort of stuff and prove himself and become the nominee, et cetera, et cetera. But at least from a Troy Nehls, I'm retiring from Congress perspective, he's got the inside track, his identical twin brother.
Absolutely. I do think, though, when you look at just to piggyback off of Reese's point, the track record that Democrats have had in special elections this year and what it culminated in really just a few weeks ago or last month in those Virginia, New Jersey, New York City elections, it just bolsters their narrative that there is energy on the ground. Even if they don't win, it shows that there's energy on the ground, even in a red district.
And if you're a Republican saying, do I want to come back for the back 2 years of President Trump's term and be in the minority? Maybe not.
Doesn't sound very attractive.
Nobody likes being in the minority. I think I'm talking to Republicans. I was talking to members today, just before I came in here, that they were even expressing just the idea of being in the minority is not fun for them. It's just even just not even being in it, just be we could be a minority.
And they're having a harder and harder time clinging to the approved talking points from the Speaker's office that they're going to hold the majority.
Yeah, definitely having a harder time, but also it's just they're not having as much fun. A majority is usually a good time, but it's just a lot of members feel like they're not getting content.
In your conversations today, Reese, what was the topicality, if any, of extending Obamacare tax credits that are due to expire December 31st?
There are a handful of Republicans that do want to do this, but it's very few and in between. I think
enough to sign a discharge petition to force it on the floor?
I don't think so, because the discharge petition, there's a big difference, as we know, of voting for extending the Obamacares and putting your name on a discharge. Putting your name on a discharge petition is a big middle finger to leadership.
Right. It's an act of hostility. And they've already had one with Epstein.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't want to do that. But if there was a bill on the floor, I think you might get 40, 50 Republicans to vote for it.
And Julia, quickly, for the White House last Monday, a week ago today, there was in the morning, a week ago today, expectation that Trump was going to push something onto the agenda. Back something on Obamacare tax credits.
And it never happened.
Got a call from Mike Johnson, backed away.
Absolutely.
And now they're like, never, forget it.
Never. I think there's this trepidation when it comes to health care, particularly from the White House. This is something the administration, or I shouldn't say the administration, Trump has dealt with during his first term in the efforts to kill Obamacare. There just has never been a physical tangible, replacement for it.
No. The technical term for that is a political hot stove moment. He had it and he doesn't want to have another. Reese, Julia, thanks so much. I appreciate it. One. Okay, we're doing it. Happy Monday, everyone. This is The Takeout. You know what we are, relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report, coming up next.